guys, welcome to another episode of Ask Olaf the Violin Maker. I'm really busy at the moment. It's nearly Christmas and a lot of people want to get their stuff finished. So I'm just doing a polishing this beautiful 170-year-old or older German violin. It's had a huge restoration, so I repaired a lot of cracks, especially down along here, a few here. That was the little F-hole crack which I posted on Instagram. So there's a lot of stuff happening at the moment. I'm also still setting up more instruments. I've got another cello repair I'm working on down here. That was one that, a music stand accidentally fell on, and so it ended up with a bunch of cracks just through here and there. So I'm just finishing that off. It's nearly done. I'm also doing a bit of retouching on another cello over here, retouching and polishing. So a lot of service work. So it's a lot of players who are basically looking at getting their instruments serviced and working beautifully again. And then I am literally setting up a double bass for a school. Now I'm gonna, for the rest of this video, I'm actually gonna talk over here. Okay, so come with me to my shop. As you can see, there's one double bass I'm working on. I'm actually setting up 3 double basses for a school at the moment. But today I'm going to talk to you from here because I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that is game-changing violinists. So violinists that actually changed the way people looked at violin, the way people play violin. It's really one of my favorite subjects because I love it when people push the boundaries of what violins can do. So violins, over the centuries, violin-like instruments were basically used as a folk instrument and also, a type of Baroque instrument, even viola da gambas and things like that. But one of the first players that really changed the way the violin was being used was Bieber. Ever be a part? No, not Justin Bieber. Heinrich Ignaz Franz Bieber. He was a very cool dude. So he was born in 1644, and he was born in Bohemia, but he ditched town and went to Salzburg. He basically left his employment. That kind of stuff could get you hanged or be beheaded in the 17th century. Anyway, he skipped town, went to Salzburg, and started writing some amazing music. Some of his music actually sounds like 80s rock songs, which is totally crazy. Have a listen to this. So he actually wrote one of the first concertos for violin. He also wrote this really cool music, and he did stuff with scordatura tuning, which is basically tuning the instrument slightly differently so you can create some really awesome chord progressions. So he was really exciting as a musician, really amazing. He died in the early 1700s. So the next player that was a bit of a game changer was Vivaldi. He was a bit of a legend on the violin. Here's a picture of him. Well, he looks a little bit like is he a woman? Uncovered first on Ask Olaf the Violin Maker. Antonio Vivaldi was actually Antonia Vivaldi. No, I think, according to all records, he was a man. Anyway, so he was a legendary violinist, and he wrote loads of violin concertos and concertos for other instruments. Now, the next game changer for violin would have been Viotti. Viotti was a great violinist. He only performed fairly early in his career, and then he mainly went on to composing. But he got together with Taut and redesigned the violin bow. So now the violin bow was actually a bit heavier, a bit longer, And originally it was a lot more percussive, but now that actually allowed people to start playing more virtuosic type of music. And the total legend of virtuoso, of course, was Paganini. Paganini, the legend. He was also a bit of a betting man and lost his instrument in a bet. And then they gave him another one, and he just said, "Oh, I'll call this my little cannon." And it's actually now one of the most famous Guarnerius instruments, known as il canone, the cannon. He was also a hypochondriac. He was a bit of a dealer, so he liked to trade with instruments a little bit, like anything to make a buck. He was definitely a legendary violinist. Like, he pushed the violin to the boundaries. And he was a little bit of a hit with the ladies, I heard. So he would go to concerts, and he'd be playing away, and then, one string would break, and he'd keep playing, and the next string would break, and he would keep playing, and sometimes even a third string would break. So he'd literally be playing on one string. Now, they said that was all done for show, but he was also a bit of a freak of nature. So he had some kind of condition that allowed him to kind of unhinge his fingers and move them backwards in a weird way. And he used to say, there is only one position. And so he must have been able to play the violin in one position. So he'd literally be leaning the ball of his hand just here. He could play first finger, and then he'd lean forward, and he could literally reach all the way up to the top. So he could do this all in one go, which is just crazy. And so he could just basically, what he thought was just play in one position. Anyway, he was a total legend and inspired a lot of players. Now, shortly after Paganini died, a little boy was born in Spain. His name was Pablo de Sarasate, and he was a bit of a legend. So they say that his dad was a bandmaster, and he was watching his dad struggle with a piece of music, and he just picked up the violin and played it perfectly, and he was only 5. Anyway, he kind of brought a different kind of flair into violin playing, because he linked, if you listen to a lot of his pieces, he started linking that really Spanish sound into violin playing. And so he really opened up the palette for players to explore whole new types of music with the violin. And of course, we can't forget Fritz Kreisler. Now, Fritz Kreisler was a total legend. He was lazy as anything when it came to practicing, and quite often, to do his warm-up before playing, instead of like what most normal players would do, actually warming up, he would just soak his hands in hot water, have an extra drink beforehand, and then go onto stage. But listen to some of their stuff, like the emotion that he could bring into playing. It was just so beautiful and touching. Liebeslied is one of my favorite pieces of music that he wrote. And Fritz Kreisler was in awe when he heard Jascha Heifetz. When he heard Jascha Heifetz play, he basically said, "The rest of us may as well take our fiddles and break them over our knees." He was so in awe of Jascha Heifetz, and Jascha Heifetz is the next game changer. He's actually been a big hero of mine since I've been a very young boy, and I used to love listening to him and the way he played. Before that, I listened a lot to David Oistrakh, but Jascha Heifetz was just legendary, and he played with a cleanliness and took violin playing to just another level. And then a lot of the stuff he did, he was actually, he'd play pieces faster than they were supposed to be played, and just perfectly in tune. So he was a total legend, and he actually really changed the kind of expectations people had from how well you could play the violin. So he definitely was a legend. Now, wish I had met him. My next game changer is Stéphane Grappelli. Stéphane Grappelli started using the violin for jazz music a lot more, and he was amazing. And I had the great fortune to meet Stéphane Grappelli in 1997 on his last concert in Brisbane. Now, Stéphane Grappelli said when he was about 85 and someone asked him if he was going to retire, he said, "No, why should I retire? Violin playing is my fountain of youth." And he was so youthful when I met him. He did pass away about half a year after I met him, but I got to have a short chat to him. I saw his Guadagnini violin, and it was a very, very special moment for me. And his playing is just, it was so easy and so beautiful, and I loved the jazz, and in the way he played. Especially, I used to love listening to him and Django Reinhardt jamming it out. Now, my next game changer is another violinist that I met, and he was inspired by Stéphane Grappelli. Stéphane Grappelli told him after he learned as a young boy at the Menuhin School of Music, but he was a bit of a wild boy, and Stéphane Grappelli basically told him to free up his music, and he was very inspired by Stéphane Grappelli, and that, of course, is Nigel Kennedy. Now, I had the great fortune of meeting Nigel Kennedy a few years ago at a concert. There was a little mishap with a broken string, and I was lucky enough to meet him backstage. And when they wanted to close backstage, in true Nigel Kennedy form, he said, "Let's move this party to my hotel." And we partied on till 5 in the morning. And I ended up meeting a lot of wonderful people at the same time, like the composer William Barton, who's local to Brisbane, but an amazing didgeridoo player, and an indigenous composer who mixes the kind of classical genre with a lot of the indigenous pieces. He's amazing. And that night, him and his mum actually performed a piece for Nigel Kennedy. It was so touching. And what I loved about Nigel was the fact that when you talked to him, you felt like he was giving you 110% attention. He would just look at you and nothing else existed. And that's how he did his performances. He kind of forgot his suit one day on the way from New York to England, so he went to Covent Garden, bought a punk jacket, rocked up on stage in pants and a punk jacket. And it shocked the classical music world, but Nigel would do things his way. And he inspired a lot of other people who thought violin playing was a bit uncool. So he actually ended up inspiring a lot of people to take up the violin. But what I loved about his performances is the way he connects with the audience. He just wants to give to the audience. And also the way that he crosses genres of violin playing. Like he can play jazz, he can play rock, he can play heavy metal, he can play Vivaldi. And he just mixes them up in such a beautiful way, and he finds the link between the music. And he's got his beautiful electric violin, 5-string violin as well, and does things. So he is really amazing. Now the next two violinists are, some people may not agree with me, but I feel strongly that people like Vanessa Mae, who was huge in the 1990s, and Lindsey Stirling, who's a huge social media star, made a big impact with their violin playing because they brought violin playing into popular music. And they actually ended up getting a huge following. And people got really interested in the violin because they finally realized that you could actually use the violin for more popular music. And it spawned this huge number of players who are using the violin in bands and in rock bands and in metal bands and hip-hop music and all sorts of other music. One person I do have to mention who did use the violin in rock, and that was in the 1960s, and that was Papa John Creech. I only found out about him recently, but I realized that he was actually quite instrumental and quite a game changer in the way he used violin for the blues and rock and blues kind of genre. And that brings us to our time now. And there are a bunch of violinists that are wonderful players but are really embracing social media. People like Ray Chen, Nicola Benedetti, as well as Hilary Hahn. And they have a huge following and they're inspiring young players to take up violin. And then there's another duo, you guessed it, two-set violin. Two-set violin also have a huge following, and they've really reignited the interest and in classical music. And through the following, they've inspired a lot of people to actually take up the violin. And I actually get to meet quite a few players, and I listen to players online, and I do actually have quite a few two-set followers following my channel as well, because they want to learn a bit more about the instrument itself. And those guys are wonderful, and what they have done for playing is just brilliant. You know, they've kind of connected they kind of make fun of the classical string player. They bring out the funny side, but in the meantime they educate in different types of violin playing, different things you can do on the violin, and they have inspired a huge following of new players. So yeah, that's basically it. These are my game changers. I was very lucky to meet quite a few of them. There are some players out there who are a little bit more introverted, and the only way they feel they can connect with the audience is through music and not so much through talking. And then there are other players who also connect to the audience through talking, and that kind of crosses a lot of barriers and breaks down barriers, so it makes people feel like they really understand and get that connection. So anyway, these are my game changers. I think all of these players are amazing. They're all legends. No, not everyone may agree, and not everyone likes every type of music, but that's okay. I'm a huge fan of the violin and what the violin can do and what the whole violin family can do. There are amazing viola, cellists, and then double bass players as well that cross all sorts of genres. But today I'm mainly talking about the violin. Anyway, watch some of these guys, see what they've done, see how they've changed the world of violin playing. Anyway, if you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe, and of course hit the little bell down the bottom because you want to find out when I post my next video. Anyway, Thanks so much for watching and keep making beautiful music. Take care. See you guys. Bye.